It's time for Trench Talk, where Joe Rogan meets underground metal and heavy music. I'm your host, Flight of Icarus with MetalTrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, give us a like if you enjoy the video, give us a rating, follow us on social media, sign up for our mailing list, and of course, consider supporting us on Patreon and Subscribestar. Right now, all proceeds are going to my mother-in-law's cancer treatment. Links to all that down in the description. All right, man. Well, are you ready to get started?
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, man. No problem. Why don't we start by you just sort of introducing yourself and your various projects?
Sure. So my name is Doug Moore. I am mostly a vocalist, but also an instrumentalist. I sing for Pyrrhon. I also sing for Seputus and Glorious Depravity. And I sing and play guitar and bass in Weeping Sores.
And my first question I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for a while. I'm just always curious about people who have like multiple projects. Like I always think of like Ethan McCarthy or Hans Grossman. Like what is the factor in you ending up in having so many different things that you're working on?
I mean, it does seem to be a whole thing in metal that everyone has like 19 different bands. There's not really one reason why I ended up having lots of different projects. I guess to some degree they kind of just accumulated over time. I kept on having these new opportunities to make music with people that, I would join a band and then a band would either last or not last, but sometimes they ended up overlapping and now I ended up having a whole bunch. I guess that I get a lot out of it as a musician because it allows me to work in lots of different circumstances and express many different parts of my musical personality. Even just as a vocalist, obviously extreme metal vocals, it's relatively restrictive type of musical expression, like there's only so many different ways you can scream at the end of the day. But even with that being the case, writing vocals for songs written by a variety of different people can put you in a lot of different places and get you to do different things as a performer. So I really enjoy the writing process in general. And so, that side of it is attractive to me. I also just really like having something to work on all the time. For a typical band, if you just have one band for a while, you're going to be writing and then you'll probably be getting ready to record and rehearsing a lot. And then you'll be recording and then you'll be touring and playing those songs. Then maybe you'll rest for a while. And only a small fraction of that time is spent actually writing and like generating ideas. And because I'm really focused on that side of creativity as a musician. That's like what I like to do best is come up with new ideas and write new things. It's productive to have a lot of different projects. I can kind of rotate through them. But yeah, it's a combination of just like the circumstances arose where I got to play in a bunch of different projects. And also I just get something out of it creatively. In my case, it's also made a little bit easier because as of now, at least, Seputus and Weeping Sores don't play live. So the demands of my time, just in terms of having all the material rehearsed all the time and being able to get together with other people to practice it, there's not as much of a hurdle to clear for a studio project as there is for the other two bands. So yeah, I really like it. I'm really lucky to have so many different projects that I can kind of cycle through that way.
Yeah, and all very interesting ones. I was also curious, are you
Thank
somebody
you.
who has trouble like doing nothing?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I really, I have a lot of energy. I'm a driven person. And I, especially just for developing lyrics, I just like to have something that I'm kind of thinking about all the time. I think it's really a productive creative practice to always have some kind of project going on, just so that, it's important to take time away as well. But I find that that writing either on guitar or writing lyrics and vocals or whatever, it's like a muscle. The more often you do it, the easier it becomes to execute and to generate new ideas. Definitely there's times where I'm like, I should not have signed up for so many different things, but even that being the case, I'm more often grateful that, like, you know, when I finish something, there's something else for me to turn to, because in the past, before I had kind of accumulated so many different concerns as a musician, you know, Pyrrhon would finish a record and there'd be this, like this, you know, period of several months where I had nothing to work on, and I would just start to go crazy really fast. So it's been good for my mental health to have all these assets that I can put my energy into.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I listen to a lot of interviews with like Henry Rollins and his spoken word stuff. And he talks about that a lot, just like not being able to sit still, like always having to be kind of on to the next thing.
Yeah, I actually, when I was growing up, I used to listen to tons of the Rollins spoken word stuff. I even went and saw him do that live at one point, and guy talked for 3 hours, and it was engaging the entire time. He's got a pretty superhuman gift for that kind of thing. I mean, whether you like him or not, his ability just to like get up on stage and like keep a one-man diatribe at least engaging to your attention it's really something impressive to me. Because, you know, when you're in that kind of performance environment, you have nowhere to hide, especially, you know, there's, you know, if you're a vocalist in a band, like the band's doing stuff, you know, you can kind of like duck out of attention for a little bit as a singer, or even if you're an instrumentalist, you know, there's other people playing usually. But to me, that's like getting up there and, you know, just playing solo piano for 3 hours just seems so nerve-wracking. But yeah, definitely he seems like a type of person who I share that characteristic with, just in the sense that sitting still and not working on something or learning something new or creating something is difficult for me. I'm actually about to go on my first vacation in like 18 months this weekend. I like haven't really taken much time off from working on stuff, and I'm like planning out the ways in which I'll stop myself from starting to write new lyrics or thinking about, you know, other professional matters. So yeah, I can definitely sympathize with that.
Yeah, it's funny how it breaks down for different people, because there's a lot of discussion around people talking about how like they wish they had less work and they had more downtime, whereas with some people like yourself, it's quite the opposite. It's really hard to sort of turn that switch and just relax. Like, is it an anxiety thing, or like what is that?
Yeah, I think that, well, I'm definitely a pretty anxious person, which I would imagine comes out in my sort of musical personality as well. And keeping myself occupied definitely prevents, you know, rumination from getting too out of control. But I also think that, you know, if the world is an engaging place, and I think the more that when you hear about people, you know, wanting to sit around more, my experience is often younger people who wish they could sit around more and do nothing, and they feel like, you know, put upon that they have so many obligations. But as time goes on and you invest yourself in the world more and more, I find that it's harder to disengage yourself from your going concerns than it is to put all your time and energy into them. Maybe that's just me, but I remember when I was younger, I used to really kind of resent how busy I would get, you know, with school and everything like that, you know, as a teenager. But now that I'm, you know, in my early 30s, I'm just like furious that there's not more hours in the day that I can spend working on stuff. So you know.
I know the feeling.
Right. Yeah. I think most adults really do wish they had more time, not usually to sit, more time to do the things that they wish they could have spent other time doing. Like, it's more that they would like to allocate their time differently, I think, than it is that they just want to sit around and otherwise do the same stuff that they would be doing, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good way of putting it. And I think that also, I mean, there's all that research showing that people who like retire tend to like die earlier. So there is something to be said about like keeping busy, like always doing something.
That's what, totally. I mean, that's what humans kind of are designed to do in some way, you know, like, and rest and reflection is important, but people, you know, they're engines that take in energy and put out activity, right? You know, they're not really meant to just sit around. So I think that there's just, you know, some very basic, you know, biological level stuff going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So turning more so specifically to your most recent output, so False Confession from the Weeping SORES project, what specifically got you interested in this one?
As in, like, how did the band get started?
Yeah, how to get started and like what drew you to it, given that you already again had these other projects going on. What was special and different about this one?
Well, so definitely the thing that sets Weeping SORES aside from all my other projects in my head is just the fact that I'm the chief instrumentalist, I guess, and there's other instrumentalists too. But before I started getting into vocals, I picked up guitar. That was my first instrument that I really was serious about and cared about. And over time, I ended up playing guitar less and less. I contributed songwriting in Pyrrhon especially, but in Seputus too for a while as a guitarist, but I wouldn't play on the records. Well, in Seputus I did early on, but in Pyrrhon I never played in the records just because, I mean, the format of the band is one guitar, and Dylan, the guitarist in Pyrrhon, is just like a world-class player who's way better than me, so there really was no reason for me to play on the records. You know, I would write my riffs and teach him the riffs, and then he would kind of, Dylanify them, and then and off he would go, and I would go back to focusing on my vocals. But so this went on for a few years, and I gradually, fell more and more out of the habit of playing regularly. And then this was over the course of like 2008 through 2015. And then around then, I found myself just wanting to pick up the instrument again. And so in order to motivate myself to play, I said, okay, well, why don't I just write some simple, like, doom metal, because that's, I haven't played much recently. My chops are really rusty. I just want to write some riffs that are fun to play and easy, and that will like get me back into the habit of playing guitar in a non-stressful way. And so it was supposed to be just like a one-man like doom project, maybe like slightly death metal-y doom, because that's just the idiom that I tend to play in, with like a drum machine, where just one person making shitty demos. I wasn't sure I was ever going to release anything, and it really just kind of snowballed because I'm not good at limiting the scope of projects like that. The riffs got more and more complicated. I eventually realized that it would be a lot more fun and more to my taste if I played it with a drummer. The drummer who was most available to me at the time, unsurprisingly, was Steve from Pyrrhon and Seputus, who's this just amazing player. So of course I was able to like open up the riffs and the structures a little bit, make them more elaborate, because I knew that Steve could definitely handle them. And then I had kind of fleshed out the songs for the first EP, and at that time I met Gina, who plays violin in the project, and kind of sort of on a lark, I just found out that she was like, this really awesome violin player, and kind of said, oh, well, this material could maybe use a violin. Do you want to play some violin in some of the songs? And she agreed right away and wrote really awesome stuff that just fit very naturally with the music without a whole lot of direction from me, which is important because she lives on the other side of the country. We can't really collaborate in a face-to-face way. So at that point, it's kind of the template was set for the project. And I decided that I wanted to write an LP. And the songwriting got, now that I knew I had these incredible musicians at my disposal, the songwriting got a lot more elaborate and involved. And I started pushing myself a lot harder as a guitarist and on bass. And so now it really became, for like a whole year, kind of the biggest musical energy dump that I had. Like all of last year, I was putting more energy into Weeping SORES than anything else. So that only kind of answers your question. I mean, like the main reason that I started working on the project is because I wanted to play guitar more, but then it just became this thing that kind of took over my life for about 18 months there. It filled up all my free time, and now that it's wrapped it up at the end of last year, and so I've been spending a little time away from it while the label and release stuff plays out. But yeah, I just really I tapped into some part of my musical, subconscious, I guess, that I hadn't been accessing too much because I hadn't been playing a lot of guitar. And then it turns out there's a lot of ideas kind of tucked away in there that I was able to express. So yeah, I really got a lot out of it. I really had a good time making that record. It was tough, and definitely had to push myself really hard because I wasn't able to play a lot of the material initially. I kind of wrote it. It was like, oh yeah, I'll be able to get that tight by the time I'm recording, which of course turned out to require a bit of work, but I made it. So yeah, it was fun. It was a good mountain to climb.
Yeah. Well, it seems to tie back into this theme of not being able to just keep things simple.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
It always turns into something bigger.
yeah, there's definitely a pattern of that in my musical projects. I'm like, oh, it's just this little thing. I'll just be like tooling around with it. And then like fast forward 6 months and I'm just like lying awake in bed at 3 a.m. thinking about some little tweak that I could or could not do in some detail part, you know? So, it's, you know, kind of a double-edged sword. You know, you are lying awake at 3 a.m, but I find that kind of time and that kind of like really focused energy is necessary to make something that's really, you know, fully fleshed out and realized.
Yeah. And you said that this kind of tapped into sort of a different emotional place for you too. So could you speak a little bit more on sort of the themes of the album and where it took you in that way?
Sure. So in all of my other going projects, I'm principally a vocalist. You know, I mean, some of them I contribute on guitar, some of them I don't really, but maybe a little bit, you know. But broadly speaking, I'm just my actual domain where I have to execute the parts and make all the detailed decisions is on vocals. So then for me, because you know I've got a background as a writer, so for me that taps into a more like left-brained, cerebral part of my personality where I, you know, think through things in a sort of more explicable sort of way. I mean, if you're doing persuasive writing, you need to be able to make your thoughts comprehensible to somebody else, right? So you have to put them in an orderly way. Right. And so there's always a big element of that in my creative process for my other bands. Even, you know, I would say those bands, there's a big, you know, right-brained emotional thing going on a lot of times too, but they're just, in terms of the subject matter I'm choosing and stuff like that, it's sort of a little bit more informed by this, you know, streamlined, logical kind of way of thinking. In Weaving Sores, I was trying to get away from that more. I mean, when you're writing instrumental stuff, there is still like a, you know, a logical thought process involved and some amount of problem solving and all those sorts of things. But I just find that there's aspects of writing instrumental music, like note choices and stuff like that, that are really very, very intuitive and that really involve this precognitive part of your brain where you can't really say exactly why you did what you did or how you came up with the idea or what you were thinking about or anything like that. There's just this kind of invisible sort of machine in your head that like turns on and spits out this thing. And then like from there you can use like your conscious mind to refine it and make it into something that you like, but it just has this sort of, you know, non-verbal thought kind of element to it that is really unique and not like writing vocals or lyrics usually is. So that's kind of what I tried to use as my guiding approach in general for writing all the material associated with Weaving Sores. It's often a little bit more dreamlike and elliptical, I think, than my other projects tend to be. It's a little bit more bluntly emotive, I guess. You know, it's a little bit. There's more dealing with relationships and internal emotional states and that sort of thing than there is with sort of external social concepts, which often appear in my lyrics from my other projects. I mean, there's no definite line, but Weaving Sores is just the most, like, that's a spectrum, right? From like, you know, left brain, logical, outward looking, concrete to right brained, emotional, intuitive, abstract. I would say that Weaving Sores is like the furthest to the right of all the projects that I'm involved with. And so there's probably a little bit more like vulnerability, I guess, in it. It's a little bit more soft-hearted, you might say. It's my softer and gentler project. It really kind of started as like, I sort of like had this idea of like, oh, I kind of want to be like do like some singer-songwriter stuff where you're just like the self-sufficient, you know, music creator. It doesn't really need a band or all like the crap that comes with being in a band, you know, a practice space and rehearsal scheduling and, you know, having to deal with the logistics of playing live. I was trying to get away from all that and just like kind of make music by myself that was inward looking. And so I'm not a singer-songwriter type musician. I like that kind of shit, but I can't sing really. And I just don't play guitar like that. And, you know, it's just not, I can't actually do that. This is kind of what came out instead, but it's sort of like spiritually, it's like my singer-songwriter, like emotional sad songs project.
Interesting. As you're talking, I just came off of a long day of working at the office in mental health, and the metaphor that comes to mind is that your other projects are more like cognitive behavioral therapy, whereas this is more of like an ink blot. Like it's just sort of a pure expression coming from, like a more unconscious place.
Right. Yeah. I think that's an interesting way to put it. But yeah, I'd say that like there's definitely Weeping Sores. There's this element of free association and kind of stuff that can't be definitively interpreted one way or another. Most of the songs aren't really about something concrete. They're mostly, the way that I wrote the lyrics in the record was by listening back to like the demo versions of the tracks and just kind of sitting there with a blank page and introducing images as they came to me while I listened to, just like the song structures and the note values and all the little details that are involved in the concrete structure of the music. Oftentimes with my other projects, I'll have a bunch of ideas just discreetly, not from a song, just kind of some stuff will pop into my head and I'll write it down. And then later on, when there's a song that we need to write lyrics for, I'll look at my roster of ideas and see which one seems to make the most sense and kind of flesh it out from there. But in Weeping Sores, I didn't really have any subject matter in mind at all when I sat down to write the lyrics. I just kind of let it proceed from the way the music felt, in a way that's a lot like looking at a Rorschach blot and saying, what does that look like to you? It doesn't really look like anything. I mean, a chord progression can't be about something. It's just a bunch of, resonances in the air, right? But I just kind of let the subconscious portion of my brain fill in the blanks there.
I like that. That's really cool. And I think that's something that engaged me with it, because to be honest, I'm not a big doom guy, but on the one hand, I'm just drawn to really genuine sounding music that it feels like what you're describing. It's just literally kind of the artists getting poured out into the music. And then that added to the fact that this is not sort of your traditional doom record. There's definitely those familiar elements, but then you've got the violin and you've got the more kind of technical drumming and even some parts that get a little bit more technical and maybe even a little bit progressive too. And it makes for someone like me a much more engaging experience than just listening to sort of the same old funeral dirge kind of just power chord sustain.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. That was high praise for the record. It's supposed to, to me, it's supposed to feel pretty stark and genuine in that way. So I'm glad it's coming across that way. But yeah, I like a lot of doom. I like a lot of sludge. Those are not my favorite metal subspecies. I've listened to lots of them, but I'm not a fan of idiomatic doom metal, where it's doom metal that's meant to sound like other doom metal bands, right? This band sounds like Candlemass, or this band sounds like My Dying Bride. We're a My Dying Bride type band, I don't really, stuff that's like that, I don't really care for, bands that are deliberately, just in general, bands that are deliberately trying to evoke someone else's aesthetic. It's not how I think about music. I'm not good at doing that. I don't really like it when other bands do that. I like when people try to sound like themselves. And I'm also just not, so death doom, as a subgenre to me, seems to have a really pretty strict, relatively narrow definition compared to some other styles. There's a really predictable set of ingredients that go into that style in a lot of cases. And because I'm not a huge fan of that niche, there's lots of death metal bands that play slow that I like. There's lots of doom and sludge bands that I like, but I'm not an aficionado of those styles. So I kind of just make weird choices compared to what people who really love that stuff would do, I think. I find that when you are really, really immersed in a really particular style of music and you try to write in that style, you're going to sound like someone who listens to shitloads of it, right? Who really knows all the standard ins and outs, and you'll do a lot of the standard moves. But in Death Doom, I've listened to the Peaceful 3. I've listened to tons of Evoken. I love Evoken. Listened to lots of the early Yob stuff, and they had kind of a death metal slant instead of like the singer-songwriter thing, So lots of various random bands in that general space of slow, heavy music that I like. But because I'm not really like a devotee of any of them, I just don't know what the regular moves are. So I just make weird decisions that someone who's more knowledgeable about that style or more like fixated on it might not make, because like the familiar patterns are more baked into the way they think about the music,
Well, I kind of like that, because you sort of throw out the rule book and you just do what you want. And I think that's so important, because this is something that's come up with a number of artists I've had on here, is there's just so much music now and so many bands, and it's so easy to get your stuff out there that it pays to be different. So to me, you're like doing yourself a disservice if you're just sticking inside the box all the time, because it's like there's 10,000 other bands doing that, like 10 million other bands doing that.
Yeah, right. These days, there literally will be 10,000 other bands probably doing the same thing. If you're like aiming for like a specific idiomatic style, there are guaranteed to be hundreds and hundreds of second wave black metal bands, or hundreds and hundreds of
that's like one of the biggest offenders, right?
Yeah, there. Right. Well, I think especially for styles of music where like the barriers to entry, technically speaking, are relatively low, there's going to be tons of that, right? Like anyone who's been in a touring metal band in the United States in the past 10 years knows that every town has at least 5 sludge bands, because sludge is easy to play. You can just, play some shitty fucking power chords and let them ring out for a long time, and, like kind of lurchingly shift tempos a bunch of times and have expensive gear, and you're done. That's basically it. But even for the more complicated styles now, I mean, at this point, the playing standards in metal are so high, and everyone can just learn from a YouTube tutorial, that even like the technical styles, if you're staying within like the accepted range of style, there's going to be just lots of imitators in that realm as well. I think as a fan, I'm definitely a lot more engaged by interdisciplinary kinds of bands, bands that get outside of the box and make strange decisions, like you were saying. I think from a business standpoint, it's a bit more of a mixed bag, because while I certainly prefer music that, is unique and idiosyncratic, I think there are actually huge numbers of metal fans who really just want to hear the thing that they heard before, but like another version of it, right? Like, there's definitely a way bigger market for like bands that sound exactly like My Dying Bride than there is for bands that like kind of run with some of those elements and do it in a weird way and combine it with this other thing, right? Like, I think there's more reward to be had by, doing something unique in the long run. But I think as far as just the friction of getting a band off the ground and getting people to start paying attention a little bit, it's often a little easier if you're more easily pigeonholed, because then you can, just tell people who like that thing to listen to it, and they will, and they'll probably like it. So, it's more streamlined in that way to be like a identikit kind of metal band,
Yeah. I think that's particularly true if you've already kind of got the exposure, like you have the channels that can kind of get your music out there. But I do feel like it's kind of a tightrope walk for people who don't have that, who are still kind of trying to get their music out there, where it's it's like you want to incorporate as much as what's familiar and comfortable as possible, while also putting just enough twist on it that like you stand out and that people will remember you.
I having gone through that process just the one time years ago with Pyrrhon, not that, I'm such a fucking big deal now, but, getting Pyrrhon off the ground, required us to make a bunch of connections and, learn what the infrastructure of the metal music industry is like, and all of these things that like I haven't had to do that ever since, because, you do it once and you learn it. And it was, a really annoying process at that time, to have to figure out, what kinds of things you should do to try and get attention, and like who you needed to be in touch with and who you didn't, and all that kind of stuff. But now it seems like it's probably even more labyrinthine and frustrating to do that for a new band than it ever was even, 10 years ago when Pyrrhon was doing this. Because it seems like all of the channels for getting people's attention are so degraded from overuse, I guess. Like there's so much noise in just like even just like the underground metal ecosystem, which is like a pretty small data environment compared to a lot of other, interests. There's already just like so much chatter that breaking through and getting anyone's attention when you're starting from zero just seems like it must be such a nightmare at this point. I kind of can't imagine it.
Yeah, it's become so bloated. Like even just using my own kind of little humble site and podcast as an example, like we're definitely not like a big deal thing, but I'm constantly overrun with requests. Can you review my album? Can you share this? Can you talk about this? And I'm like, great, that's what I'm here for. But I'm like, man, if I'm getting this much, then I can't imagine like what the bigger outlets that can actually like spread the word to a larger audience are getting. And it's like, what percentage of that can you actually cater to? And then even when you share all of that, what percentage of that can the listeners and readers actually digest and dig into?
Yeah, that's something that I've really thought about quite a lot, actually, because I also have a blogging history, and the biggest outlet that I ever wrote for regularly was Stereogum, which is like more of a indie rock kind of site. But being an indie rock kind of site, they have a bigger media footprint than most metal sites would, just because the field is bigger, right? And when I was writing for Stereogum, I actually made sure that my email address for them wasn't listed anywhere, because even just from the sort of PR word of mouth, metal media circuit, I was getting hit up so much to cover stuff that I like couldn't even I could barely even look at all the email subject lines, much less decide which ones I wanted to field.
It's anxiety provoking.
Yeah,
like, my
really
first thought is I open my
know when something that you really want.
Yeah. My first thought when I open my inbox, which is like the first thing I do every morning, just because I know I need to like clear out as much as I can to just keep up with the flow, is like I just feel a sense of anxiety, because I'm like, I feel for all these bands. I want all of these bands to get a fair shot, but like I'm balancing that with like, I'm only one person, and that's not realistic.
Yeah, you end up developing these really aggressive like filters for like what you'll give the time of day to. You end up being like, you see like just the type of band name you don't like. You're like, that band, it's probably one of these types of bands. You just fucking delete it. You just ruthlessly delete it. And that's something that was someone's hard work. They busted their ass, probably, even if you don't like the record. I'm sure they busted their ass making it. They really considered all their creative decisions or whatever. And you just see that they're called Night Kiln or something, and you're just like, that name sucks. Delete. And that's all the consideration they get. I mean, but that's just a necessary factor.
Yeah.
Being a music writer in this day and age, there's been this huge explosion of how many metal bands there are, just in absolute numbers, over the course of the genre existing. There's been exponential growth of the number of metal bands, because recording technology's gotten cheaper and distribution's gotten easier with the internet and all that stuff. And it's great overall, but when you're in a position where you have to try and like parse it and filter it and find the good stuff, it becomes just this nightmare problem where there's no good solution to really finding all the best stuff. You have to just acknowledge that you're going to miss a bunch of crap.
Yeah. And yeah, you're hitting the nail right on the head with how I feel. And I try to fight the urge, because like I've definitely had situations where like album art's usually big for me. If I'm turned off by the album art, like it's literally that whole like judge a book by its cover thing. Like I try not to do that, because I've occasionally come across albums that had really lousy album art but were amazing. But it's really hard to overcome that hurdle. And then, band name can be one too. But I've brought this band up before, and I think they listen sometimes. So not to make you guys feel bad, but I said it in the review, and I think y'all are okay with it. I think that Necropanther is a really kind of dumb band name, but they make awesome music. So I'm like, hey, I love the band. I just think that the name's kind of goofy. Sounds like a hair metal band.
Right. You put Panther in the band name, you're in territory immediately. But yeah, I mean, it's metal, so to some degree also there's just like so many permutations of ridiculous band name, even within the realms of legendary bands, right? Like, think about the band name Gorguts. I fucking love Gorguts. One of my favorite bands. That's an objectively terrible band name. It just is. It's not good, but you don't even hear it eventually. That's the funny thing about the band name thing, is that when you first encounter the band, the name is the first thing you get an impression of. So you're immediately like, okay, I get a sense of the band name. But once you're actually into the band and you hear the band name, you don't really think about what the band name means anymore. It just becomes this symbol for what the band sounds like in your head, right? So like you think about Gore Guts, you don't think like, oh, it's gore and guts, right? Or like Pig Destroyer, you don't think like, oh, they're destroying pigs, or maybe it's cops, right?
Yeah.
You just, when you hear those names, you just think about what the band sounds like and what their lyrical content is, what their album art looks like, all these other things. So it's just a funny kind of dichotomy, because, you know, initially it's such a huge thing, it can really put you off from a band immediately, but by the time that you're past that entry point thing, you know, you really don't even think about it at all anymore in most cases, at least for me anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I hadn't even thought about Gore Guts, but I'm sure there's plenty of bands where I'm just like, yeah, you associate the name more so with the sound than actually what the name itself is, what the words are, and what they're supposed to be associated with. I don't know.
Right? Yeah. And that one's so funny because it's like gore and guts. All right. It's,
great effort.
Yeah, right. It's really heady stuff you guys got going on there, but they actually are like,
yeah, they're really heady band. Yeah,
sophisticated band. So they had this fucking total numbskull name. I mean, of course, you know, the sound changed a lot over the years and everything, but I think that for that reason, sometimes when I'm making choices about that sort of thing as a musician myself, thinking about like, oh, what should we call this song? What should we call the album? You know, what should the art be like? I find it's important to remind myself that you shouldn't take it too seriously or get too stressed out about it, because ultimately, if the music itself is of quality, people will get past the band name. They'll get past the bad album cover, you know, usually, you know, the song title is kind of screwy, whatever. Like, people can see past that sort of thing if the quality of the work is high enough. So really, like, when I hear about, you know, bands, you know, putting off releasing a record because it couldn't come up with the right album title, I'm like, that doesn't seem like that's really worth it to me. You know, like, I understand wanting everything to be right, but at least for me personally, I find that focusing on getting the music right and then just pushing out the door as fast as you can to get something else going on is really the order of the day. Yeah.
And the advice I always put out there, my biggest rule out criteria out of anything really though, is if I open this doesn't happen often, but occasionally I'll get an email and I browse through it real quick and there's not a single link to the music. That's immediately like I'm done.
Yeah.
So the best advice I can give to anyone who submits content is to make it as easy as possible for me to hear probably your best song or your favorite song, or, you know, whatever song you think I need to hear. Like, make that as easy as possible, because that's really what I'm doing. I'm barely even reading what's in the email. I'm clicking the link. I'm listening to about...
You scan the email for the keywords.
Yeah.
And then if the keywords look favorable, then you click the link.
Yeah.
But
and even with the link, like, you've got about 15 seconds to catch my attention.
I better be able
reality.
To see it. Yeah. Back when I was... I was editor of Invisible Oranges for a while, and I would get, you know, of course, probably more emails from like just random DIY bands at that point than I've gotten at any of the other music writing jobs that I had. And I actually at one point ran a post where I was just like, all right, you want to like send a blog guy your album and get him to cover it, format your email like this. Just do this. Like, do this exact thing, fill in your band name, fill in the link, and like, and it actually seemed to get a little bit better after that. I got fewer of the emails where it's just like, hey, we're a band, we love if you cover us, and with just no assets whatsoever. I don't know. I feel like this is such a ridiculous complaint in some ways, right? Because, like, you know, it's kind of unfair that bands even have to do this stuff themselves. You know, when you get into playing music, you're getting into playing music. You're not getting into like email PR, right? So it kind of sucks that being good at email PR is also this essential skill if you want anyone to hear your band. It's like just kind of annoying to me that that's something that stops potentially good music from being heard.
I mean, it sucks, but it's the reality. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, right. So,
there's
like,
no way around it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, to some degree, if you're a musician, your job is not just playing music, it's also just being like able to take care of yourself. You know, it's being in a DIY music scene, there's more demand than just playing your instrument. You have to be able to do other stuff too. You have to be able to, you know, communicate with people and get along with people and show up on time and all that stuff. Yeah. So, I wish that wasn't the case and that, musicians just got fucking carried around on litters by servants, but that's not how it actually works. So,
yeah. And I think the more serious you are about your project, the more you want to, like, quote unquote, make it, the more skill sets you have to have. Like, you can't just be good at your instrument. You can't just be good at recording. You also have to be good with communication, networking, business. Like, there's so many, branding, like things that you may not want to think about. But if you are that person who is like, I want to hit it big, I want to play big venues and all that stuff, it's like having good music just isn't enough. Like, not anymore.
Well, of course. I mean, to some degree, it's never been enough, like the music industry being a, pit full of vipers who, can grease their way to the top. That's like not something that just happened. That's always been the case. Right. One thing I think that's nice about metal is that you can attain, a solid fan base and, respect from your peers and all that stuff without having to do all of those things that you just described, like brand your band perfectly and all that kind of thing. I mean, certainly there are some matters like that as a musician, I have definitely made it my business to be effective at, communicating with people is something that I really prize, being reliable, being punctual, all those kinds of things. There are some things that
may seem small, but I think I joke all the time that those are qualities that most musicians don't have. So I think that alone honestly does make you stand out. Like, I've made cracks to a few musicians coming on the podcast where they're like 45 minutes late to the time that we originally planned. And I'm like, musicians, man. I get it. I mean,
and that's totally true. I mean, having spent now most of my adult life around primarily other musicians, like those are precious qualities. I think that, you have to have some amount of that just to like keep your head above water doing this. But the thing that I think is nice is that you can opt out of some of that stuff. There's some things that I, as a musician, really don't care about trying to maximize in this like non-musical skill set world. Like branding, I'm not really interested in my brand. I'm not trying to brand my bands really effectively either. Like, they have nice art, the packages look nice and everything. I like to think they're artistically cohesive, but there's a whole like, mercantile and merchandising oriented side of, band branding that some people are really into it, really want to be good at that stuff. And I just, I don't really bother. I don't really do it. And that's fine. I still manage to like do the things I want to do as a musician. My music finds an audience. And that's something that's cool about metal being like a DIY and sort of more arts focused style of music, as opposed to like some of the more, commercially oriented styles of music out there, is that there is some latitude to not do the full blown music professional thing and still like, be treated seriously and be treated like an adult, as opposed to just like some idiot who like didn't set up their, fucking merchandise table the right way or whatever.
Well, even that can be a struggle sometimes. I got a kick out of I interviewed Imperial Triumph before they played their set, and they like had to set up their merch booth like in the actual like restaurant booths that were available, and like their merch hadn't even shown up yet. It hadn't been delivered, and it was it's just like
this is on the West Coast tour recently with Holy Octopus.
Yeah, they were at Twilight's Bar and Cafe. And yeah, it's this really small space.
Where are you based again?
Portland.
Okay, yeah. So I knew that Twilight was somewhere in the Northwest, but I couldn't remember exactly where it was. Sick. Not sick that they didn't get their merch. That fucking sucks, actually. But
well, it came through last minute, like right before they had to go on. But yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. I mean, obviously we know those guys pretty well, and actually, I know that Zach is a person who actually really does like care about the merch and the branding side of things. Which is great. That's something that he gets a lot out of, as a musician. So it probably would have really sucked for him. Probably was sad about it.
Yeah,
So
totally. And he was working the booth, and they had a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, it definitely does run the gamut in terms of like where people put their priorities. And then they talked a lot about that new like graphic novel they're putting out. I already pre-ordered it because I'm like, that looks pretty badass, and I don't
nice.
see a lot of bands doing that.
I know the artist that they. I mean, I haven't seen any of the actual book, but I know the artist that they hired, and that he's a really gifted guy. So
yeah, and they were just cool dudes too.
Yeah. Yeah, their drummer Kenny actually is a guy that we've known since the very beginning of the band. He is really good friends with our original drummer, this guy Alex Cohen, who you might have heard of before. He plays a C, and he's just like kind of a hired gun type drummer now, right? But yeah, Kenny was Alex's drum teacher when Alex was still a wee boy in college when we started out, and so he's always been kind of a friend of the band and something that we've, sort of grown up adjacent to. And he actually filled in for us on drums at one show, I think about three or 4 years ago. But yeah, great player, great guy. And, a live powerhouse, as you are now aware.
Yeah. I think that's actually how I got connected to Kenny initially when I first started talking to him, was because a friend of mine in another New York band, I think, knows Alex and had played music with them or something. And then it just came up that, hey, he knows Kenny from Imperial Triumph. You want to talk to him? I was like, hell yeah. And so that's how it came. It's kind of cool how there's like all this little sort of, another band described as like inbreeding between all of these different bands and projects, and how they all become sort of this web of related things as opposed to all these just sort of separate entities.
I mean, in the case of Imperial Triumphant, we actually shared a whole rhythm section with them at one point. Back when Alex was in the band, in Pyrrhon still, he also was an Imperial Triumphant on drums, and our bassist Eric also played bass in that band. So, like, that band especially, there was a lot of overlap. And then we've kind of like another band that we've had a lot of overlap with is Artificial Brain. We borrowed their drummer at one point for like almost a whole year. They had Eric filling on bass for them at one point. And we've toured and played live with them a ton. I mean, so New York City has or the New York City greater area. I mean, Artificial Brain's really from Long Island, but this area, there's a big scene of that type of stuff. But even within that relatively big scene, there's not that many people who can play that kind of music. So to some degree, you all find each other and you become friends because you need each other's help. So, and that can be really productive and cool. You get a lot of, it is a little incestuous sometimes, as you suggest. but you also end up with, there's these guys around here. There's so many just gigantic musical personalities. So many guys with so much skill and so much vision that like having, even like a somewhat inbred community of people like that. It's a really cool and special thing. I mean, I don't really love living in New York City, but the musical talents that are scattered around the area here, it's really it's pretty unreal. You see people playing together who are just in most places would be just like flattening everyone around them. But here there's just guys who can hang with them left and right. It's really cool. That's probably the thing that keeps me in New York City more than anything else, is there's just in this tiny little niche of like super aggressive, weird, heavy music that a lot of my bands are kind of stationed in. There's just so many talented people around here, and it's really an asset. It's really something that I treasure about living here.
Yeah, definitely. Just out of curiosity, if you weren't there, where would you prefer to be?
Where would I choose? Frankly, just a place with big mountains. That's what I like. I like big mountains. I think that Colorado is an awesome state. I actually really like Oregon and Washington. Pacific Northwest is really cool.
Yeah.
Parts of California that I really like. Utah is an amazing, beautiful, like surreal place. Yeah, if I was going to choose, I would straight up just choose based on the geography, and I love mountains. So that's what I would prefer. But, my whole life is here. I've been living in the Northeast for most of my life. And, once you put down some roots somewhere, it becomes difficult to relocate. So maybe sometime in the future, I'll get a chance to move out to the Rockies or the Cascades. But for now, I'm staying put.
Yeah. I actually spent most of my life in Chicago, and then we relocated to Memphis for about 5 years, and then we came out to Portland, and now we've been here about 4 years, I want to say. So big geographical and
Yeah. Well, cultural
changes
difference
all
from
around.
Memphis,
Yeah.
Memphis to Portland, that must have been something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. It's like night and day. I
Yeah.
gotta say, I honestly sometimes miss Memphis.
I mean, there's one thing I figured out in Memphis is the food.
Oh yeah. Food's great.
It's no joke, the food around there. It's crazy.
Yeah. Honestly, the people are really nice too. And like, to be frank, they're a little bit less uppity there. Not to bash my Portlanders, but y'all can get kind of uppity about a lot of things.
Well, yeah, I mean, dude, I fucking lived in Greenpoint from 2010 to 2014. You know, Greenpoint as in like the neighborhood and girls, right?
Oh god.
So I know that like an overly hip area, it starts to degrade really, really fast. But and Portland definitely had some of that vibe. But there's also like in areas like that, there's things you can't get in a more low key or staid part of the country. So it's a give and take.
Yeah, always.
Definitely, I find that you spend more energy on your environment and like really up tempo, like trendy parts of the country, right? You're more you have to put out more to get along than in areas where things are a little sleepier and the pace of life is a little bit more controlled.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there anything else like in the works that you want to announce or share? Tours?
Sure. Well, why don't I just? I mean, there's no super extensive live stuff coming up for my projects, but I do have stuff in the works all over the place. Let me just give you the rundown real quick. So the Weeping SORES album, False Confession, comes out on September 13th, Friday the 13th, through iVoid Hanger Records. You can find it on their Bandcamp, the Weeping SORES Bandcamp, etc. As far as other projects, Pyrrhon is working on finishing our 4th LP. We are going into the studio over the winter, and it should come out next year.
Hell yeah.
Seputus is also working on another LP. The songs are written instrumentally. I'm writing my vocals right now. And that'll probably come out next year as well.
Nice.
And then Glorious Depravity actually is in the middle of tracking an LP. And I just did most of the vocals for that just a couple days ago. And so there's a little bit more tracking left to do, but that will also probably be out next year. So next year is going to be a big year for me. I should have 3 LPs with these different projects. I mean, if all goes well, I don't want to jinx myself.
Yeah,
but
that's
the
exciting,
plan.
Though. Nice.
Yeah. I mean, like especially because the last 2 years, none of my bands really released anything to speak of, and I was just like writing all the time. So it's cool to finally see like all these projects start to reach the point where they'll bear some fruit and people will be able to see what I've been working on. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff coming up, but the main thing is Weeping SORES in a couple weeks on the 13th.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for giving me this much time. I know we initially talked about less, but it seems like we just got going.
Hey, man.
Which is always good.
You made it easy, man. Usually I've done a few other podcasts where I feel like I kind of just locked up and was like, oh, I can't say anything. Sometimes you just kind of get a little too tense to talk openly, but you made it easy, man. So thank you.
Oh, good. That's always my goal. I want to just get people talking and not make it too much of a chore. I want this to be comfortable.
No, totally, man. It was fun.
All right, man. Well, enjoy your vacation. Try to sit still a little bit, and I can't wait to hear, what comes out next year, and we'll have to do this again then.
Totally, man. Hit me up.
All right.
Bye.
And that'll do it for this episode of Trench Talk. Thanks as always for listening. Once more, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, like it, give us a rating, follow us on social media, sign up for our mailing list. I personally send out an email every Friday. And again, if you're a returning listener, if you really feel like you're getting added value from this, please do consider contributing to our Patreon or Subscribestar. Just even $1 a month makes a huge difference. It's been helping me cover my overhead costs, but again, right now, all of the proceeds are going to go towards my mother-in-law's cancer treatment. So thanks for those of you who have hopped on for that or contributed directly through PayPal and all other means. It really means the world to me and my family. With that said, I will see you next time. This is Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.